A rescue team is trapped with monsters on an abandoned ship. The space surveillance vessel, Academician Vladislav Volov, is stationed in the southern Pacific Ocean. The crew attempts to establish contact with the orbital research station, Mir, where Nadia Vinogradova, mission leader, is working. Nadia requests the astronauts transmit collected data for further analysis. Amid her duties, she manages to enjoy a game of chess with one of the astronauts and shares tender moments with her husband, the ship's captain. Suddenly, a team member on the station spots an unknown, fast-approaching object. She snaps a photo and alerts her colleagues to check through the porthole. The object is a cluster of electromagnetic pulses that disrupts video and radio communication with the station. During intermittent connections, the astronauts call for assistance. Moments later, data transmission begins, but something invades the vessel, hacking the main computer and attempting to breach its access code. The ship's commander finds himself unable to stop it as the entity takes control, leaving the crew as hostages to an unknown force. 7 days later, a small tugboat, Sea Star, veers off course in the same region, getting caught in a typhoon. Foster reports rising wind speeds, suggesting a potential hurricane. Captain Everton orders a shift to sail against the wind, hoping it will keep them afloat. Noticing that the barge they're towing is taking on water, Foster alerts the captain, but he dismisses further action, confident in the ship's resilience. When a massive wave hits, it damages the Sea Star, flooding the engine room. Steve Baker, the engineer, insists they cut the door open with a blowtorch to protect the engine room. As the crew's situation worsens, Foster plots a course toward the typhoon's eye, aiming for a brief respite to make repairs. On the bridge, Steve argues with Everton to release the barge as its weight threatens to drag them down. Everton refuses, valuing the barge's reward. Another wave strikes, breaking the chain and sending the barge to the ocean floor. Everton, who invested his savings in the barge, is devastated. Retreating to his cabin, he contemplates his future, while the crew patches up the Sea Star. With food and water running low, Foster brings a ray of hope by reporting a ship 12 miles away, appearing stationary. Upon approach, they identify the ship as Russian, Academician Vladislav Volov, a sophisticated satellite tracking vessel. Everton, re-energized, orders the crew to investigate. As they board, they find bullet holes and an empty bridge, with no signs of the Russian crew. The vessel appears abandoned, and since it's in international waters, maritime law entitles them to claim it. The captain promises the crew a reward of $3 million each, dreaming of a hefty payout as they prepare to tow the ship to port. Foster is less enthusiastic, reminding everyone that quick money rarely comes without consequences. She also notes that the ship can't be considered abandoned if there's even one survivor on board. To her horror, Everton is unfazed by this, willing to eliminate any survivor to secure the possible reward. After giving his orders, the captain preps the ship for towing, but first, they need to restore power to start the turbine engines. Steve and Squeaky head to the engine room to get the equipment operational. The control panel is damaged and the relays have been ripped out, but the engineer and his assistant quickly fix the problem and bring the power back. As soon as they do, the central computer and robots in the workshop activate. The electrical wiring shorts, creating a chilling noise, but most unsettling of all, the surveillance cameras seem to be operating independently. Foster warns the captain that someone may be controlling the computer, but he dismisses it as impossible. After tracking the location of the towing ship, something releases a massive anchor, piercing it. Heo is badly injured, but Woods refuses to rescue him, prioritizing his own safety. Foster wants to jump in and help her colleague, but the captain forbids her from taking the risk. Steve, who is always clashing with Everton, leaves Squeaky in the engine room and rushes to assist. After pulling the wounded Heo from the water, Steve tells Squeaky to lock himself in, suspecting that someone else is on board and responsible for the sabotage. Following the last incident and the sinking of the tugboat, Steve questions Everton's motives, But the captain suggests they put aside their differences to accomplish their shared objective. Realizing they need to split up, Woods and Richie are assigned to assist Squeaky in the engine room, while the captain and Steve search for the medical station to treat Hio's wound. Meanwhile, small robots begin coming to life and crawling around the ship, but the crew ignores it. Squeaky is the first to notice something odd when he sees a cable being pulled into a pipe. Trying to investigate, he follows the robot into a tangled mess of wires, where he is suddenly attacked and disappears. Woods and Richie come across an armory and decide to upgrade their gear in case of further confrontations. Going a bit deeper, they find a missile launch shaft and 2 catapults for emergency evacuation. Woods is disturbed by the blood everywhere, but Richie is confident they can handle any threat. Meanwhile, Foster is stitching up Hio's leg, discussing what they'd do with the money if they survive. Hio dreams of opening schools for children in poor countries, while Steve wants to buy an island and invite Foster along, but the navigator doubts they'll ever get the money. At one point, Steve opens a medicine cabinet, only for someone wearing a gas mask to emerge and start firing wildly, almost hitting the entire crew. Steve quickly subdues the assailant, discovering that it's Nadia, the sole surviving member of the Russian crew. This revelation disappoints Everton. Steve tries to contact Squeaky but gets no response, realizing something's amiss. He heads to the engine room, ordering Richie and Woods to follow. On the way, the two encounter a robot and, in a panic, fire at it in an attempt to defend themselves. A frantic Nadia wakes up, pleading with them to cut the power to prevent the entity from moving. She explains that the rest of the crew didn't survive the energy attack from the mirror station, which released gas to kill people, though some managed to escape on lifeboats. No one believes her strange tale except Foster. Acting quickly, Nadia shoves the captain aside and runs to cut the power. Grabbing an axe, she heads for the cables, but Foster stops her. Nadia begs her not to interfere, insisting that the entity is using electricity for its own ends, and warns that no one will survive. Hio ties her up to prevent her from posing a threat to the crew. Woods and Richie discover a lab filled with robots. They cut the power, but a short circuit reactivates the equipment. As they examine the room, one of the robots attacks, injuring Woods with nails. Another robot appears and starts shooting at them, but they manage to hide and warn Steve of the danger over the radio. When Steve arrives at the engine room, he tries to open the door, but it's welded shut, and Squeaky is nowhere in sight. Soon, Richie and the injured Woods arrive, realizing something is very wrong when a robot suddenly opens fire on them. Working together, Steve and the team disable the robot by cutting its power wires. Everton suspects Nadia is behind the sabotage on the ship and threatens her with a gun, demanding to know where Squeaky is. Foster realizes Nadia couldn't be responsible since she's been hiding in the medical bay the whole time. Although Everton and Hio still distrust Nadia, she insists they need to cut the power to stop the alien energy from haunting them. Shortly after, the rest of the crew gathers on the bridge, bringing with them the remains of a robot that Nadia, horrified, realizes contains pieces of her husband, Alexei. Squeaky is still missing, leaving the crew puzzled, but Foster asks Nadia to finish her story, now beginning to believe it. Nadia explains that an alien energy corrupted the main computer, overtaking all navigation and electronic systems, and eventually taking control of the ship. First, it started building scavenger robots, and later, biomechanical creatures made from human parts. While the remaining crew abandoned ship, Alexei and Nadia stayed behind, attempting to cut all power cables. However, it seems her husband was captured and turned into a biomechanical entity. To verify Nadia's story, Richie inspects the creature and discovers an electronic implant in its brain, sustaining it. Suddenly, the robot grabs Nadia's hand, but Steve quickly destroys it with the butt of his rifle. Everton remains skeptical, suggesting they're witnessing failed Russian experiments instead of alien life. A storm forces the crew to adjust their course to avoid sinking, but the robot made from Alexei's body reactivates. and Richie finally puts it down with a series of precise shots. Realizing the mounting danger, the crew decides to leave the ship as fast as possible. On their way to a lower deck, they begin to suspect the alien energy has intelligence, as it's altering the ship's course to keep it afloat. In the engine room, they hear a knocking sound behind a door. Steve peeks inside, claiming he sees Squeaky, but the others are wary, fearing what might be behind it. Suddenly, Squeaky, now a biomechanical creature, bursts through, grabbing Woods and lifting him before a larger robot emerges, attacking. The crew fires back and takes shelter in the communications room, where Richie tries to call for help. Everton, however, destroys the radio, claiming he owns the ship and doesn't want competition for the reward money. Furious, Foster strikes the captain, freeing Nadia. Meanwhile, a robot begins breaking through the walls. Richie realizes they need to understand the enemy and tries to communicate with the life form controlling the computer. The team discovers that this energy views humanity as a virus to be eradicated and is using human parts to build its minions. The crew decides that sinking the ship is the only way to stop the alien life from spreading. Richie, however, separates from the group, unwilling to become a victim of the robots. While the rest go to disable the main computer, Everton makes his own deal with the entity, offering to take it to New Zealand or Australia. Meeting a robot in the workshop, he bargains for his life. The main group, meanwhile, reaches their destination, but finds that the entity has relocated the main computer. They're soon attacked by a massive robot, but Nadia, Foster, Steve, and Hio manage to escape. Outside, Nadia suggests heading for the antenna targeting hall, thinking it may be safest during the storm. As they climb, Foster slips from a ladder, but Hio saves her, sacrificing himself and being swept overboard. Meanwhile, Richie prepares an explosive device, defending himself against smaller robots. Foster and Nadia realize that the alien intelligence is steering them toward an island with a British intelligence station, hoping to stop the spread of the biomechanical creatures by destroying the ship. They receive a call from a nearby vessel, but Steve warns against answering, fearing the alien could spread to it. As they prepare to sink the ship, they encounter Everton, now a biomechanical entity but still conscious. Foster shoots him with little effect, so Nadia uses a thermobaric grenade, with Steve pushing Everton out, finally defeating him. Planning to fill the ship with fuel and set explosives, they run into Richie, who now operates independently, having set his own timed explosive. The crew prepares to escape, but a massive sentient robot attacks them. Steve and Nadia are knocked unconscious, while Foster, trapped in a sea of bodies and fuel, is captured and interrogated by the robot. Steve and Nadia regain consciousness and attack, but their weapons have little effect. Richie reappears with a grenade launcher, freeing Foster. The robot strikes back, causing part of the structure to collapse, leaving them in a dangerous position. Nadia and Foster manage to find safety, hiding behind layers of metal doors as they plan their final move. The women discover diving suits and prepare for evacuation. As time runs out, Steve dismantles part of the metal structure, finding a wounded Richie. Before passing, Richie reveals critical information about the missile silo and catapult, which could help them escape the ship. Nadia and Foster are ready to jump into the water when they encounter the giant robot again. It has located and destroyed the detonator, disrupting their original plan. Realizing escape is impossible, Nadia urges Foster to flee, pushing her into an adjacent room and allowing herself to be taken by the robot. Nadia promises to reveal the locations of the remaining detonators, sacrificing herself as she fires at gas cylinders, causing a massive explosion that only slightly damages the robot. It continues to pursue Foster, who is soon found by Steve. Together, they head to the missile silo, following Richie's advice. Once there, Steve secures Foster to the catapult and prepares it for launch. The robot draws closer, and Steve plans a heroic sacrifice to ensure Foster's escape. As the robot breaches the silo, Foster straps Steve to her and activates the device. They launch from the ship, tethered to a cable. With grenades left by Richie, the catapult pulls the pins, causing a massive explosion that destroys the ship. By morning, a nearby vessel notices the survivors, and a helicopter arrives for their rescue. Foster finds herself spotting Heo and tries to check if he's alive, but a disfigured man suddenly attacks her. She then awakens, realizing it was just a nightmare, with Steve by her side, reassuring her it's all over. They have defeated the dark entity that took over the Russian ship. Thank you for watching. If you like the video, please subscribe.